You're on.
Okie dokie. Sorry? Okay. There will probably be less talking from out there today anyway. So that's good. Okie dokie. Need another shelf then. Okay. The numbers have been slowly decreasing. I don't really care about numbers personally at all. I just want to make sure that it's not because this is so boring. Because if it is, we can skip out of it. Or if this is irrelevant, you can skip out of it. It's not a big deal. But it might be easier. The reason why I try to go through some of these nitty-gritty, more seemingly philosophical things is because I keep on repeating, if you don't have a framework, you're pointing at random things, right? Even religiously. So like when somebody comes up, for example, when we were talking about, actually we're going to talk about identity, but like when we ask things like, why can't I do X? We don't realize that the question is nonsensical sometimes because we lack the framework. Right? So we're not intentionally being nonsensical, but we are being that. So I just want to recap what we've done so far, and then today I wanted to talk a little bit about reasonability.
Sorry.
So awkward if you don't know what's going on to see yourself. That's why I'm not looking to right. As I look towards the right, putting this down. I'll look at them after. So the first weekish, I wanted to bring up the whole concept of absolute truth, right? And I'm not asserting I believe that I've arrived at absolute truth, not that I am absolute truth, right? And that's why I'm actively and willingly a Christian personally. But that regardless of where one personally stands, etc., subjectively, the idea that we're trying to get behind is that there's this thing called truth that hopefully we're all looking for, regardless of religion or quote unquote lack of religion. I don't know that anybody really lacks one. We're trying to interpret that, okay? The reason why I talked about relativism is that this is probably a better way of articulating some of what we were going through. We were talking about during the hike, actually, a couple of us, is that there is such thing as small t truth, right? There is such thing as a subjective experience. And that when we start in that subjective experience, what it should be pointing at and leading us to is the capital T experience. So the disease of our time is that we're so lost in small t that we either ignore or don't believe in big T, right? And so the end result is, if we're all looking at this elephant, right? You've got some people like, no, it's pink. And then another like, no, it's green. And then instead of trying to find out if it's actually pink or green, everyone's like, if it's green to me, it's green. Right? If it's pink to you, it's pink. And it's got a real color. Right? If there was no such thing as color, we wouldn't know what color is. We wouldn't name it. Right? And so that's why it was important for us to realize that, because so often in not just in society, I see this among servants, and I see it among even us clergy, God forgive me sometimes, where we're teaching personal opinion, and that's not okay, right? If we're teaching personal opinion, it needs to be prefaced as personal opinion, and say that this is only a personal opinion, but where there's an absolute truth, then we point at that, not at ourselves, not at our personal subjective views of things, right? And then I wanted to expound on it even more, so I played some of that music on purpose to make a point that we're making claims all the time and hearing claims all the time but not identifying with their claims, right? So for example, when I was playing some of the sexuality songs, it wasn't just like, oh, look how bad the world is, they sing about sex. We already know that, okay? But like, it's more to say, they're telling you that this is what sex is for. They're telling you this is the right expression of sex, and if you disagree with this, you are either a misogynist or a bigot or insert all sorts of things here. But people aren't stopping to say, oh, but you're making a claim. You're saying that there is such thing as right expression of sexuality or right views about sexuality or wrong views about sexuality. From where did you get the authority to assert that? Because as far as I'm concerned, if you don't believe in absolute truth, you're pointing at the elephant and you're saying pink and I'm saying white, and you're not giving me a reason why it's pink. You're just telling me it's pink. And so Christians are often on the receiving end of that, right? Of being told you're just saying this and this and this and this and this and this. Cool, some Christians do that. I'm not pretending they don't. But at the same time, I think we are often forgetful that others are doing the exact same thing, right? And so if there's supposed to be a discussion, then what we should be looking for is the bigger questions. Is there an elephant, first and foremost? Is there such a thing as color, or is that a human construct? Do we make it up, right? And then we can arrive at, well, then how do we define color? I know that this sounds like way too intense and not simple, but the problem is that we're not simple, right? And we do have these underlying things that are going on that are just assumed about one another, right? And then that's why we then went to talk about morality, right? To talk about, we are inconsistent as a people, right? On the one hand, we will say things like everybody's entitled to their opinion, I'm not going to judge anybody's actions, right? Most of you said I would never do that on a survey, and yet at the same time, laws do precisely that. So culturally, we're very okay with judging actions, right? And then most of you were not comfortable saying Hitler is a good guy, right? And like people weren't comfortable being like, oh, you know, in his opinion, killing Jews is fine. It's just his opinion, right? And you guys weren't comfortable saying that, right? And you're comfortable. You were. The one question is funny, and I keep coming back to it because it's every single group, every single time, saying it's arrogant to judge people's actions. And then the next question is about the Inuit practice of infanticide, of killing infants under particular circumstances. Many of you felt uncomfortable calling it wrong, right? And so it showed, and the question is on purpose, not as a trick question, but to kind of force us to realize that we're not consistent. We're all going to be. But if we're looking for absolute truth, I've got to be comfortable confronting even myself, right, on my own inconsistencies, right, of being able to say, I'm saying this, but I don't really believe this. You know, I felt this really strongly because of the doubt that I went through in my life. I used to get anxious if certain atheists spoke to me or if somebody brought things up. And so it was, and I was upset that I was anxious because I knew I was anxious. I was like, because if I really believed it was true, I wouldn't be anxious, right? If I wasn't worried that there isn't an answer to what they're saying, I wouldn't be nervous, right? And so that confrontation was like of self, and not to say, okay, well, is it absolute truth? Let's go find out. Okay, like, does it exist first and foremost? So I want to ask you questions that you're not going to answer necessarily out loud. I want you to ask about them because today I want to do a little bit, not very much about doubt, but mostly about faith. Because doubt could be like its own series. But I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions, and it's on purpose. I don't want to answer out loud, whether you know or think you know the so-called answer or church stance on these things. Okay? What is the church stance on Big Bang or evolution? Okay? Not your personal stance, but you know the church stance. Yes. No, I want you guys to think about it. I was going to ask initially, But because it's not going to go anywhere specific, I decided not to spend too much time there, because usually I do. What are the lists of what is the official list of church morals? What is the church's belief on free will? What is the church's official belief on the origins of same-sex orientation? What happened at the Council of Nicaea and why does that matter? What is the definition of a Christian? Why are you on earth? What's your purpose? How does the church view personhood? What exactly is a human? What is the Bible? How did we get the Bible? How do we interpret the Bible? Why do we interpret the Bible in that way? What is the church's view of the world and its relationship to God? Are they separate? Are they one? Is it a two-story universe, a three-story universe? Is it a one-story universe? If any of you knew all the answers, I'd give you a prize. I doubt you do. But I wouldn't be surprised if many of us assume we do. Because for some of these, the church doesn't even have an official stance. Okay? And I'm saying that because when we deal with faith and doubt, we often have no clue what we're talking about. And then we're having philosophical discussions with each other, right? And we'll start pulling out the I just thinks and I just feels, right? That goes nowhere. And then people will jump in with their positive or negative experience. And so that's a proof of something, right? Of being like, no, but I have this friend and he was gay and everyone was so mean to him and they told him he was filthy and disgusting and he could never have communion, he needs to get out and therefore there's no God. It's like, I don't know why that's the conclusion, right? Those might be facts, right? That might have happened, people might have been awful, they might have treated the person awfully, and they might even have said, don't come to church. But therefore there's no God. So then if an atheist does the exact same thing and kicks them out of like school, does that mean there's no such thing as education? Or does that mean there's no such thing as atheism? No, sorry, I'm not talking to you, sorry. So that's what I'm saying, we often have a problem in our discussions because we're using different languages, right? And we're pulling from these different experiences, these small t experiences, these subjective experiences, and then we're trying to take them to make a conclusion, a far-reaching conclusion about things, instead of stepping back and saying, what do these things mean, right? Or for example, not like, I don't want to use this like the homosexuality thing because it seems to be the example for everything all the time now. But let's make it more benign. Let's talk about, say, smoking, right? Let's say the scenario was that somebody was told because he smokes he can't have communion and therefore there's no God, right? What I'll see a lot of, and this is why we're going in this order of the talks, is somebody being like, no, you need to feel empowered. You need to be able to smoke. And just because they disagree with you doesn't mean they have the right to tell you that. And who are they to tell you that this act is wrong? So the first question to ask shouldn't be like, so we start off by, oh, look at how mean those people are, therefore they're wrong because they're mean, right? Whereas the right question should be, is there an absolute truth about whether smoking is right or wrong? Is there an absolute truth about any act being right or wrong, right? So if somebody says, oh, because lying is just wrong, then the question is, why is it just wrong? How did you arrive at that? Why do you believe that lying is just wrong? So are you saying that you believe that there are some things that are just true? That's very religious of you. Or how did you arrive at that conclusion? Right? And that's why this conversation about truth really matters, because we all dance around it. We're all throwing palms and incense at the elephant, right? But with our backs to the elephant, no, like we're all talking to each other with our back to being like, I'll tell you what the elephant looks like, instead of everyone turning around to try and look at it, right? So that's what really, really matters. So doubt, which is normal, okay? Doubt, which is very, very normal, isn't a problem, right? Doubt's not a problem. The only time doubt is, in my view, problematic is when you're not actually looking for truth, right? Doubt is only a problem when you have an answer that is your target of receiving, right? Where you're coming at something wanting to prove a position. If you're in that place, your doubt is not a healthy one. It's not going to go anywhere because it's not motivated by truth, right? So people can talk at you. You can be given almost anything, and it'll make no difference to you, right? Because you've already decided, right? Whereas an openness is the ability to step back and say, might it be true, right? So for example, when someone tells me, oh, here's this Buddha statue that drank milk, if my starting stance is because they're not a Christian, they must be lying, then I'm going to be ignoring everything they say to me. They're like, no, it's probably made up. Yeah, they told you that, but it's probably made up. Yeah, I know you have the video. It doesn't matter. Somebody edited the video. It's like, okay, well, no, we've been able to prove that it was edited. Like, who proved it? Probably that guy's not credible. And it's like, well, no, that guy's an expert. It's like, yeah, but I found he made a mistake. And it goes into the dumbest arguments. Instead of dealing with, did it happen or not? Because then the first question is, what is the truth? And then the second question is, and what does that mean? Right? Does that mean that Buddha is God? If it happened, maybe. But then you need to have the language to discuss that. That's what I'm trying to get at. So let me ask you guys, what is faith? If someone asks you, what is faith? How would you guys respond? Please use the mics when you do it because online they can never hear.
I just got here, so I don't really know what we're talking about, but believing in the unseen. So
to faith is believing in the unseen.
I could be way off, I don't know what you're talking about.
No. I'm asking generally, if someone were to ask you what's faith. So now if I challenge back, I'm not tearing apart your answer. I'm actually sincerely asking questions that could follow. Right? Being like, for example, so if faith is just believing in the unseen, why do you believe in your unseen God versus another religion's unseen God?
I think there's like multiple factors. One of them is culture. It's what I've been brought up in, and so it's kind of what I've been believing. I don't know. And then the other factor I would say is it makes sense to me. The dogmas of our faith and our beliefs add up with my personal values, which are also governed by that dogma. So I would say that.
Okay, I'm going to come back to some of these after, because otherwise I might go too far than I expected. Who else?
I would say it's a trust in something or someone.
Okay, generally speaking. And then, so then what is your reason to trust? Online people, if you want to type into the chat box, go for it. Anyone else? Mark.
the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. You can't tell me I'm wrong because it's from the Bible.
Okay, this Hebrew is coming out right at me. I was waiting for someone to do that. So let me be critical, St. Paul. You're just stating that your belief is somehow evidence of something I can't see. How? Because then other people make claims too. No offense, St. Paul.
To give an example, I'd say like, say I have faith in Dido, and a lot of other people also have faith in Dido for whatever reason. If you have a lot of people that have faith in Dido that he can, I don't know, shoot a three-pointer really well, then that is evidence of his ability.
So the number of people trusting that Dido can shoot, oh, he's okay at soccer, is somehow proof that Dido could, as opposed to just that Dido did.
Not necessarily the number of people per se, but like the fact that there is faith in something would probably lead someone to look further into whatever the claim is that we have faith in, especially if it's not something tangible that can always be proven. Like it's hard to prove that someone is trustworthy, but faith is kind of like, or people having faith in such a person is sort of evidence that they are trustworthy, even though you can't really test their trustworthiness through the scientific method. That makes sense.
That's actually very insightful. If I can rephrase it, and tell me if I'm rephrasing you right. What it sounds like you're saying is that there are people who think it is an evidence that that thing that they're thinking might be real. Okay, that's an interesting answer. Very insightful. Anyone else on this side of the room? No? Okay, I won't be on blast. So when people are asked this, I wanted to dig more into what you said, Julie, but I'll do that later because it can be relevant to the second half. Some people will talk about faith as some statement of things they believe in, right? Oh, well, I believe in, and then they'll start saying my faith is, and they'll have a list of stuff. Others, actually, you guys didn't do this, start off with a list of things they reject, right? Of being like, well, what I don't believe is, and then they put like a whole bunch of things there. But then a lot of people do some of what happened today, just say very abstract things, right? Things that are just kind of like theoretical and like, you can't really hold them, and that you can't prove, right? And then it says, well, you can't prove that. It's like, well, prove to me it doesn't, and then it gets stupid, right? And then it's like, ha ha ha, no one, like, and both sides walk away winning. But my question then to you guys is, if you believe something that you cannot prove, see, touch, measure, how is faith rational?
One of the ways that C.S. Lewis spoke about faith is it's kind of like a starting point for seeing. Like if I don't believe or have faith or trust in the power of my reasoning abilities to some extent, some kind of degree, then there's nothing I can actually trust beyond me that's going to be true. If I don't trust the ability of my eyes to see something, then I can never know or see anything in front of me because all is just a delusion. So what C.S. Lewis says is, I believe in Christianity not only because I see it, but because by it, I see everything else. Which is kind of like a circular argument because then why should I start believing in it? But there's I think there's a tension between reason and faith, that they constantly accompany each other, that in that leap of faith, how can I explain it? But there's always beginning reason to believe in something. Like I have proof, I've dealt with you enough times that I can put my trust in you. For example, like a surgeon, I might not know all the intricacies of the surgery he's going to operate on me, but based on all the credible people who said that this is a really good surgeon and he's done, look at all the success he's had in the past. I'll put my trust in him, despite my limited knowledge in medicine, to operate that surgery, kind of like what Mark was saying. So that there's a reason there that begins my faith. But at the same time, also the flip side can be true. The faith can be the beginning of understanding more and more. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna make this more personal, and I'm gonna be like, me for a second. I'm not attacking you. Okay, Lewis is a moron. Okay, I don't actually think that I was just, but like let's just call him that and say, okay, he's saying that the beginning of it could be by choosing to believe this, and then you'll have Dawkins on the hand being like, oh, that's really cute. Well, I can choose to start believing that there are random monkeys on Jupiter that I can't see, and if I started believing it, could that be the doors to monkey being on Jupiter? Come on, folks, there's no monkeys on Jupiter, et cetera, et cetera. So let me be more vicious. Let me ask you guys individually, why do you, not why anyone else tells you, why do you believe in God? Or have faith in God, sorry.
I think that there's, like going off of what Mark was saying about the belief in things unseen, that there is a junction between, or rather where science and faith meet. And I think that science is something that's really rational, and we try to explain how things are the way that they are, or why they are that way. But there are things that science can't explain, no matter how hard we try, like where does everything come from, for example. We know how everything is functioning, and that's great, but that's like the equivalent of knowing that, Humpty Dumpty is falling off the wall. But how did he get on the wall, So there are questions that are unanswerable. And so, from my view, it is rational to believe in something unseen, because we also know that we are limited in our pursuit of acquiring knowledge about everything.
So let me be critical again on purpose, and I'll be less vicious. If there were answers, would you need to have faith?
I personally think that it can be a little bit cyclical, because I think that faith provides answers.
Right, so if you're saying, well, science couldn't answer these questions, or science could eventually answer those questions, which is what they claim, right? So what you're saying is what a scientist would call the God of the gaps, right? Of saying that because there's these gaps in knowledge, believers are filling those gaps with God, so God is this God of the gaps. But the more we know, we close in those gaps, and therefore no more need for your God. So I'm asking you, do you think that's the case?
I think that as a Christian, the truth of the faith that I believe in actually aligns perfectly with everything that scientists have proven, which is further solidifies the faith that I have, because he's not God of the gaps, but he's actually God of the whole.
So why have faith in something parallel? Because if you're saying your faith is in agreement with science, why are you putting your trust in the faith as opposed to just the science, if they're the same thing?
Because science has its limits, and that's what I was trying to say.
So science removed those limits.
I guess I would wait and see.
Good answer. That's a truthful answer. Anyone else willing? You don't have to. I'm not gonna tear your apart. Thank you. Thank you, Olivia. Go for it. What's your name again? Sandra. Sorry.
So for me personally, I believe that I had faith for as long as I can remember. I don't think it was necessarily driven by my family being Christians, because knowing myself, I did question a lot, and until today I do so. When I was questioning the most, around 15, 16 years of age, my dad said this to me, and I think that's kind of what grounded me in my religion. And he said, you're never going to be able to understand everything about life, or about not even science, not even religion. So essentially, we have no proof that our religion is actually true. However,
it's about what you experience, and that's the concept of having faith. And for me, for as long as I can remember, and I've experienced it, a more like it's almost my whole life I felt like God was guiding me. I felt like my prayers were being answered. Like there is a force bigger than myself that was guiding me, and it's that feeling, it's that sense that I've ultimately that actually grounded me in my religion.
What if that was all feeling and chance? What if that was all feeling and coincidence?
It could have been, but here's how I rationalize it. Let's just say, the world ends and we found out that there was, no God, for the sake of argument. I wholeheartedly believe that me living my religion according to my religion makes me a better person, gives me a meaning in my life and fulfillment, so it makes me happier, and it's good for everybody else around me. So even if we were to say, I don't, and to be honest, we don't really know. I don't think we can prove it. It's just going back to like faith. And for me, I just feel like living my life as a Christian is going to be good for everybody around me and for myself. And I personally, again, not in a rational way, but I feel God present. And that's why I believe what I believe.
So what's goodness? That was the last week's talk. I want to make an answer that. I would be critical if I were an atheist. I'd be critical of what you're saying by saying you're still being arbitrary. I'm not saying me personally that you are being arbitrary, because I agree with many things you said, but I'm saying the outside view, if we're looking objectively, would be to say, well, you're calling yourself a better person based on what? If God's not real, then how do you know you're better? Right? You just chose this moral list and said people who do these things are somehow better people, right? And then they'll be like, and let me show you this other person who maybe did this and this and this, but is way better than you because they did, and then they insert all these things about why that person is better. So, but what I will take from what you're saying is that your faith is a choice. Okay, I'm gonna come back to that concept too. I don't know what's going nuts. Anybody else want to give a reason for faith? Marie.
I think it's a hard question to approach in general because I believe like us being here, we already have faith in like our environment as like of it being real. Like even science, believing in science, you have faith in it already. So if we find it hard when we're comparing religion and science together,
The science belief system?
I do think so.
Is it supposed to be?
Oh, it's not supposed to be.
Yeah.
Science.
Because you're saying that they're two different belief systems, and so I was asking, is science a belief system? Is that the claim of the discipline of science?
No, it's not, but I think that science is socially constructed in that it already puts claims at the forefront of their hypotheses, which says something about belief.
Yes, I agree. Where science becomes an ideology instead of science.
Yeah, so when we're talking about this concept of faith, I already think that you have to have faith in science and like other things because they have part of beliefs. Yeah.
Interesting. So then, do I have to choose a belief system? It's a trick question.
Well, I think if you're looking for objective truth,
Good answer.
then there's selection, I guess. I don't know.
No, good answer. Good answer. Because that was my point, right? Because it sounded like there's things being pitted against each other. Okay, let me step up for a second. The reason I'm asking that is because when we're answering touchy-feely things, forgive me, and I also want to make it clear that touchy-feely is not necessarily wrong. I'm just saying that tends to be our tendency. But when we answer those things, you're going to run into obstacles when you say, I just feel this and I interpret this. all of those things. You're allowed to interpret, you're allowed to feel all those things. But then there still begs the question of, but then why are you choosing to believe that? Because that's what the faith is at the end of the day, of saying, I'm trusting it. And so somebody has the ability to challenge your trust. And well, why do you trust that? Why do you trust that that even was a spiritual experience? Right? For example, a friend of mine that's struggling with atheism right now was just like, you can artificially induce a spiritual experience by stimulating certain parts of the brain. Does that mean, therefore, there's no such thing as spiritual experience? Okay? And so we would not be okay, for example, to overuse this analogy, if a friend of yours thought he could tightrope walk across Niagara Falls on his first attempt without any training. Statistically speaking, it's not zero. It's very close to zero, infinitely close to zero, but not zero. Who of us would be like, I have faith in you? Go do it unless you get your friend killed, right? Like you wouldn't, right? And so to many people when they're looking at religion, that's what they're seeing. They're saying, why are you making such a dumb choice, right? Why are you choosing to tightrope walk across Niagara Falls? You're dumb, right? That's the view of faith. And that's why I'm asking, do you know why you believe, right? Not to shake people, right? But I was saying, there's a reason for trust, and many of the reasons are valid. But that we have to look beyond certain things. In the same way that I wouldn't go to somebody who's not a surgeon and say, I want you to remove my appendix. I trust you. With enough YouTube videos, you can do it. Right? Like that would be irrational faith. Right? So I remember, you guys, I don't know if I'm dating myself, CBC radio, do you guys know John Belushi? Yeah, he got in trouble, and usually that doesn't help my case. He had a program called Q. It was actually really popular, and he would interview all sorts of celebrities. And then he had a sexual scandal accusation that he actually was found innocent of, but he lost his show. But he was interviewing Richard Dawkins. I don't know if you guys heard of Dawkins, the God delusion guy. Okay, so it was funny to see. Remind me of the way that people, forgive me, it's like this is recorded, how some people behave around like clergy and bishops and stuff when they suddenly go into their religious voice and they're like gushy, right? And like that kind of thing. I felt like he was doing that, but like on the atheist side, where he was just like, Selena. Dawkins, like, what would you say to those poor people who still believe? I'm like, hi, they're listening. Like, we're not deaf, right? Like we're on the radio. The way of speaking was like, these poor morons who think they can tightrope walk across Niagara Falls, like, what would you say to them, right? And then this wonderful man like, give his advice. But then people will also say things that make no sense. Like, religion has caused more wars than it has brought peace. Statistically speaking, that's not true. Right? Even though that gets regurgitated over and over and over and over again. Actually, that's not true. Right? Science has explained our origins, therefore there's no need for God. Priests are hypocrites. God is your teddy bear, etc., etc. So if you look at a dictionary definition of faith, they give two definitions. One of them really surprised me because I wasn't expecting to find bias in the dictionary. But the first definition is a complete trust or confidence in someone or something, which is cool. The second one is a strong belief in God or in the doctrines of a religion based on spiritual apprehension rather than proof. That's in the dictionary definition. That was very surprising to me. Of just an open statement of there is no possibility that the faith could be based on a real evidence by dictionary definition, which baffles me. But if we were turned around and asked the question, which is what we've been doing the last 3 weeks, what do you believe to anybody? So an atheist, usually the answer is nothing, or it'll be humanity, or it'll be science, right? There'll be all these random things. But what they're failing to apprehend is that they're expressing a complete trust in something, let's say. They're just choosing another discipline to put faith in, but we'll come back to that in a second. And because of it, big questions get ignored, right? Which I think where you're going with some things, Olivia. So for example, like evolution, I'm not giving my personal stance on evolution, but regardless of whether you believe in it or don't believe in it, theistic, non-theistic, it doesn't matter to me right now at all. But this starts with the premise of the primordial goop, right? That begs the question of, well, from where did the primordial goop come? Right? That's a rational question. That's not a speculative, weird question of just trying to be complicated. If things exist, we need to ask them, where did they come from? Right? If you're saying there's this thing that was there, we have a group of people who are asking the question of where did that goop come from? And then you have other people who are saying it doesn't matter where it came from, look at what happened from it. Right? And then treating these as two divergent areas when they're not. They're not divergent areas, the two matter to one another. Peter.
That primordial goop was eternal in the past.
Was it what?
Some others will say that the universe or whatever that primordial goop you're talking about was eternal in the past.
Right, right. And I'm not going to the specifics of any theory, right? Which Big Bang kind of contradicts because Big Bang said, well, there's a beginning, right? Big Bang actually is a big problem for the atheists of the 20th century. Because up to the Big Bang, that's why it baffles me sometimes when Christians are so violent against it. Certain kind of Christians, not all Christians. When I'm like, before Big Bang, an atheist could get away with the universe being eternal, but Big Bang was saying, no, there's a starting point. And that caused a problem. It actually caused some atheists to become theists because of that. But what I want us to get at is all of these weeks together is that faith is reasonable. Okay, that it's not a separate discipline than reason, right? It's not contrary to the dictionary definition, something that you do because you don't like proof, right? Whatever that means. But faith is actually a decision. I agree with you. Okay, it is a decision based on but it's not just a random decision. It shouldn't be a random decision. It should be a decision based on an individual's best assessment of the evidence available, right, to that person. It's something that everyone has. Theist or atheist, everyone has faith. I'm sorry. It's a trust or a confidence in something. And sometimes we articulate that something, right? The creed is an article of faith. It's a list of things that we're trusting, right? That we're believing. And what I've been trying to do with us together the last 3 weeks is to talk about critical thinking a lot. How important it is to ask the right questions, not just any questions, right? And then how to draw conclusions properly from that evidence. And not knowing something is not enough to make a judgment for or against something. It's not enough, right? It's important for us to read carefully, right? And to pay attention to words being used, right? When people say things like, oh, that's somebody's instinct, I'm like, well, that's a claim. How did you know that that was true, right? And I'm sorry to keep drilling it, but I just want all of our minds turned on because you are under perpetual assault, right, of everything, right? So I'm saying pay attention to what's being there. But what I would suggest is, if there was no evidence for faith, then you're all stupid. And I'm stupid, we're all stupid. Right? Like if there's absolutely no reason, then we are just psychologically trying to band-aid ourselves to feel better about a tough world that we live in. But I would hope that there is reason. right? So I'm not going to do a series on apologetics, it's not my thing. But I was trying to go through the last few weeks a bunch of things to try and point to you at things that suggest the reasonability of faith, that you might not identify as reasons for faith. For example, what is the first law of physics, of thermodynamics? What's the first law? Matter cannot be, it can only be transferred from one form to another. Which begs the question about the universe. Is that a law? That's a law. Okay, it's not a theory. So we're saying that law holds to everything in existence except the universe. I mean, that's what we're suggesting, if it's just there, right? I'm not saying this is the reason to believe. I'm just trying to point out there's a lot of things that are going on, right? If something exists, a rational human being says, how does this thing come to be? How did I get a bench? Oh, somebody chopped down a tree using something. Well, what is a tree? A tree is a tree. How did it come? It came from a seed. Where did the seed come from? Previous trees. Where did the previous tree come from? Right? And you're going to go along. It's a rational question. It's not people just being philosophical. Where did it come from? Because things don't just appear. I don't think you would find it normal in your day to open your eyes and suddenly see a meatball sub on your bed. Right? It begs the question of where did this thing come to be from? How did it come here? And you're going to rationalize it by, maybe my mom did this, maybe my husband, maybe my friend, maybe whatever, somebody got Uber Eats and they got lost. But you're going to be looking for reasons because it doesn't make sense. It's not reasonable to assume, a normal, reasonable person would not assume that you randomly have a meatball sub on your bed. Right? And so the same thing about matter. We're not crazy for asking questions like that, of saying, how is there matter? Right? If somebody wants to say, I don't like your explanation for matter, no problem, but on what basis did you evaluate my reason? Because there are many theories about how matter came into existence. So when somebody says, oh, yours is stupid, then it begs the question of why is it stupid? If it is still an unanswered question, why is yours the best one? Or why do you believe that yours is the only one? Right? These are important questions. Our existence means something. Morality. That was why I talked a lot where we had the discussions about goodness. That we think there's such thing as good is indicative of absoluteness, right? So when it came to matter begs the question of how did it come to be there? There's a lot of stuff that exists that begs the question of did somebody make it? Okay? But then with morality, I used to think this was a weak argument for faith. I don't anymore. Where it's this question of why do you have a sense of good and bad? Why is it that people care about calling anything good or bad? Animals don't. Right? The lions, when they kill like an animal, there's not like a mock trial in the jungle against the lions of how dare you kill that animal. No one cries about it. Right? We're not suing lions, right, for killing their prey. But humans do. Right? And humans evaluate motive. Why does motive matter? But that we think in that way is indicative, to Mark's original point, why is it that we all have this sense that there is such thing as good and bad? Any human being, they might have different views of the good and bad, right? Even cannibals, who many of us here would like, cannibals don't eat their own, right? They have their own rules. Even within their system, they have rules, right? They're saying there's some things we just don't do, right? That there are some things that are sacred. And that begs the question, where does that come from? Right? And what I'm trying to get at is that in every single kind of thing, it's pointing at bigger questions that suggest that an absolute exists. This one's a little bit more philosophical, The very discussion about there being reason is an indication that reason exists. What do I mean by that? Why do people try and make sense of things? Someone answer. Why do people try and make sense of things? Because what? Yes, because they believe there's such thing as sense. If you don't believe there's an absolute truth about it, you won't bother trying to make sense of it. If there's no absolute, then it means there's no order. Those things go together. But the world indicates that there's order. So we have every reason to believe in order, right? For example, because there are laws in science, not random theories that make people feel good, we can land stuff on Mars. We can land stuff on the moon because they really exist, right? If they didn't really exist, your equation means nothing. I have no idea if I can even get there and how to do it. But because there's order, I can. The world signifies that there's order. And then the natural question is, if there's no such thing as absolute truth, then there's no such thing as order. If there's no organizer, there's no organization. It's that simple, right? So we can disagree about all of those things. So I am not going to go into all the different evidences for God, but what I'm trying to get at is to say that if you take any discipline, music, biology, genetics, philosophy, sociology, philosophy, right? Anything, all of it is going to point at order. And the reason any of those disciplines exist is because people believe there's order, or they wouldn't study it. What is the point of studying something that's completely random? There's nothing to study. You can't predict anything, right? If I don't believe there's such thing as an objectively healthy body, why bother studying the science? Because it's all random anyway. Whatever I do doesn't matter. I can open this person here. One time I'm going to find an appendix, next time I'm not. What am I going to do? Right? But because I know that there's order, I know it's always here, and because it's supposed to be in order, if it's not, I'm able to say, oh, that's wrong. I'm saying wrong based off of the order, based on the existence of objectivity. And so what I care about is that we recognize that faith itself is extremely reasonable, because faith is the looking for meaning. It's a belief that there's a trust, faith, there's a trust that there is meaning. That's the claim of theism, that we do believe there is meaning, objective meaning, okay? And so it's not about what are the alternative explanations, though you need to consider those. That's not why we believe. We don't say, I believe in this because I like this package. It's supposed to be reasonable, including religion, right? So for example, when my friend was saying, okay, well, in your brain, I can mimic this thing, I'm like, cool, that's a good evidence in my favor, not against me, right? Like, do you believe that anger exists? Do you get angry? Can you hand me anger? Can you give me a vial of anger? Can you measure anger? Can you give me 4 ounces of it? You can't give it to me, but you believe in it. And I, especially as a former pharmacist, can tell you physiologically what's going on in your brain when you're angry. These neurotransmitters are doing this, all this is happening. So if you're telling me that because you can chemically induce something, right, that therefore the thing is not real, then you're also telling me that emotions are not real because we can chemically induce those too. Rather, what's going on is that we believe in a whole human being. So I have no problem that when somebody's having a religious experience, that something physiologically is happening at the same time. What's the problem with that? That's normal, right? It would be a problem if I was claiming that there's a separate unit in which something is happening different from this, then I'd have a problem, but I never made that claim. right? You have to come back to what is the claim. But now I want to ask you something very specific about Christianity. What's going on with the claims of Christianity that makes Christianity different than any other claim? Here.
The thing about Christianity that made it explosive in the first century was claiming that they had seen personally Christ risen from the dead. Whereas many other religions were either a certain teacher distilling truths to their followers about things that they personally saw, but none of the first believers actually saw. But the Christianity itself worked at its grassroots as a movement of individual believers who actually all simultaneously experienced something such as the resurrection. And they said, I saw this. And based on that, it kind of ties back to what Mark was saying about a bunch of people believing in something, but that being a genuine experience versus, like, not to mention other religions by name, where they have a prophet who will say, I saw this, I saw that, and all the first believers are only taking it based on somebody's words instead of action.
Thank you. Because usually no one comes to that, to be honest with you. Most people don't start with the incarnation. Most people will be like, oh, because we're about love, and many people are about love, right? It's like, oh, because we have, and there'll be all sorts of randomness. What Christianity has going for it is this belief that the divine and the world intersected objectively, not subjectively, not theoretically, not a cute feeling. That's where you need to start as a Christian, is in God became man, right? Is that we have something historical that entered history, right? When I was dealing with my own faith issues, it was like, okay, let me cancel out the ones where there was nothing in history. I can look at Islam, I can look at Judaism, I can look at Christianity, but the ones where there was nothing at all, it's just like, well, that's just someone talking, right? But where somebody intersected with the quote unquote real world, now that I understand that it's all real, but whatever, right? They say, okay, well, what's going on here? Because the claim of Jesus Christ, those of you who are in the Gospel of John, on Tuesdays, it's going to get nitty-gritty because Jesus was very explicit about his claims. There was no like misunderstanding, right? Is that here's some guy, what looks like some guy, saying, "Hey folks, I'm God." That's a big claim, right? Like if I were to just be like throwing that out there after the talk, like just you know, I'm God. Right? Like you wouldn't go from like, oh, it turns out that he's God, right? And everything is hunky-dory and you move on. That's not how it works, right? But here's this person going to the synagogues, entering into a real history of real people. Jews are real people, you met them, right? They have a real history, have a real heritage, they have a real lineage, regardless of what you think about their histories, whatever they existed, right? With prophets that they can claim that regardless of who you think wrote the books of prophecy, wrote them before he came, saying things that they could not know about a particular person, being born in a particular lineage, of a particular time, in a particular city. There's something to that. That is reasonable for a normal, reasonable person to say, I should investigate that. Right? Regardless of whether you believe in it right away, but it's saying, if it's true that all of these claims were made, I can't, as a rational being, I can't ignore them. Right? If today someone told me who was a Muslim, there's this guy who predicted this, and this precisely, I can be like, whatever. Like, it begs the question, if I'm being rational, I was saying, how did that happen? Is that true? Was it really before? How specific was it? Really, that was the answer? And so we have, for the Lord, testimony, not only of his disciples, but of the Romans and the Jews, that there really was a Jesus of Nazareth, right? That he really did do miracles. To the point that actually, sorry, I know I'm taking so long, I'm almost done. To the point that actually there's a 2nd or 3rd century text that I really like, and I'm glad it's late. The reason why I'm glad it's late is because it's a Jewish document confirming that they had Jesus of Nazareth put to death. And the reasons for that they wrote, they said, we sentenced him to hanging, is what they said. And they said for 2 charges. Blasphemy, you can guess why, right? They claim that he's God. And for witchcraft. Why do you think 200 years after the fact, they're still having to say that? Because Christians were still doing witchcraft. And because Jesus didn't die down. Right? Gandhi was a big deal when I was a kid. I don't know how many of you guys could care less about Gandhi. I don't know how many of our kids even know who he was. Right? Like it's canceled. I'm saying like good people come and go and we forget all about them. But Jesus, 200 years later, they're still talking about him and people are still doing miracles in his name. And the Jews are compelled to say something. Right? The Romans documented it. Actually, as a matter of fact, even James the Less, who was murdered by the Jews, and that's just a fact, I'm not being anti-Semitic, that's what they did, they wrote it in their own book, right? If you read Eusebius, he writes about it and says there was a good man named James. And when we killed him, and this is the same documentation from the Bible, when we killed him, there was an earthquake, and many of us believe that the earthquake was because he had killed a just man. It's not a Jewish Christian writing, it's a Jewish writing, right? And so I'm saying that there's a lot that happened in that time, but there's something that we really need to think about a little bit more, which is resurrection, like Peter was talking about. Because when you read the gospel accounts, the disciples were wimps, right? They were not very intelligent. The gospels don't tell a story of these bright young men, right, who have their act together. They have like the messed up people, right? And they were afraid of everything, right? And when the Lord was on trial, they all beat it and left, right? And which is so real, right? When Mary comes to them saying, I saw the risen Lord, it says that they told her, these are fairy tales. That's literally what they said to her. These are idle tales. These are fairy tales. It's not like their first response was, oh, just like he said, right? Let's go, right? They're like, no, you're on crack. Sorry for the language. That's what they were saying to her. Like, you're messed up. That could not have happened, right? Then the Lord comes to them, and Thomas is like, I'm sorry, I still can't. I didn't see it, right? Like, I didn't see it for myself. But you need to ask a really important question. Why would these guys who are hiding out in a room, petrified for their lives, willing to deny the Lord because they were petrified of just being thrown out of the temple, not killed? They were scared of even just being thrown out of the temple. We know historically, not emotionally, objectively, reasonably, 11 of the 12 disciples were murdered for their belief. We call it martyrdom. It was murder. Why? What made 12 story saints morons intellectually? I'm sure they were bright, using a little bit of hyperbole. Okay, really not the cream of the crop people. Go from hiding in a room because they're afraid to be kicked out of the temple to being publicly flogged and beaten and saying, we're not going to stop talking about this. If what they saw wasn't real, why would they be willing to die for a lie? I can understand why 2nd, 3rd, 4th generation is mine. No problem. I can psychologically see if they're convinced enough that they might. But it's completely different for the eyewitness. Why would the eyewitness, how many of you would be willing to die for something that you already know is true? Like, I don't think I would be. Right? Where it'd be like, whatever I know in my heart was true, but I don't need to die for it. These people died for it. Not only them, of the 70, if I'm not mistaken, almost all 70 got murdered. The early Christians were persecuted not just by the Romans, but also by the Jews. They had to be, they were refugees, right? By the year 70, there was a complete divorce, right, between the Jews and the Christians. Then we went through 10, like we talked about Nairuz, 10 major persecutions. There was murdering after murdering after murdering after murdering. If what they were seeing was not real, who wants to sign up for the murder train? Logically, reasonably. It's compelling. Okay? And that's why I was carrying apart some of the things that we said, that if we bring back our reasonable, our trust, our choice, our decision to just being touchy-feely, and I'm not saying touchy-feely has no merit, it has some merit, it actually does. But I'm saying, but if you ignore that this is a real event, you're missing out. Like you're really missing out. And the problem with most people's faith is they don't know, right? And the problem that we have a lot in our spiritual lives is we're not treating spiritual life like it's real. And so you don't get results. And when you don't get results, it all seems fake, right? If you tell me when I put this key in the ignition on, the car should turn on, and it doesn't, time after time after time after time, I'm not going to believe you, right? And so faith, this choice, has to be reasonable, and it's based on something real. It is not a figment of our imagination. It's not this optional thing. And there's a reason specifically why to be a Christian versus another form of theism. And that the starting point of every Christian, if you do not know it about yourself already because we're baptized so young now, is your profession in the belief that Jesus Christ really came to earth, is really God, that he really died and really rose. That's what a Christian is. No howevers. Everything else is built off that claim. And that's what we'll be talking about in the times to come. If this claim is true, what does that mean? When Peter stood in front of the crowd on the day of Pentecost, he proclaimed this: Jesus of Nazareth, who fulfilled the prophecies, who did this and this and this, truly came, truly died, and truly rose. And the answer to the people was, we believe you. What do we do? Right, that's the next question. So we will go from there to creation and identity to find out what it means to be a Christian. And then it will be hunky dory. Any questions, comments, criticisms? Go for it, Olivia.
I just wanted to share, for anyone who doesn't know this, because I think it's so cool and like exciting about Christianity and what's like, obviously everything that you said is like the most major thing that sets it apart from all of your faiths. But also like when you stop and really think about how the Bible came together, it's crazy. Like it was written by 40 different people from different parts of the world over the span of 1600 years, and they didn't know each other, but their story always correlated. And it was like just so unceremonious in how like it was not unceremonious, but I would say effortless in how it all just connected. And then afterwards, the implication of Jesus coming here and becoming man, like rid the world of even a reason for religion to be, because religion was supposed to be the connection between man and God when there is a great chasm between man and God. And then Jesus came here and closed that gap and was like, well, now there's no wall, so you don't even need all of that stuff that you've been doing anymore, because here I am and you can connect and it's all Gucci.
Exactly.
strong faith, why is it that we still fall? Why is it that we go through ups and downs? Why is it that we're not strong?
Because we're human. Because we're human, right? In the same way, for example, that I know that I'm going to gain weight if I eat a certain way, and I know that I want to be healthy, but I still eat what I feel like, right? The problem is when we don't let the truth guide us, and that's why that was the emphasis so much, right, in these last few weeks, was that it's okay that we fall short of perfection as long as we're aiming always to move towards truth, right? That's one part of it. The other part of it is that I'm firmly that every kind of doubt, which is manifest in behavior, because if I make a wrong behavior, that's a sign of doubt of some kind, right? Because if I really believed that I would just do the right thing. But that all doubt is a product of a lack of either knowledge or experience, right? That sometimes I'm just missing a piece of data, or it might be that I haven't acquired that experience yet, so I'm more fearful or apprehensive about it, right? That I'm still going to be more governed by my feeling than by the truth, which is natural. Like that just takes time. Go for it, Julie.
So we're thinking that like if all else fails, I feel like as a basis of understanding if logic fails you and if science fails you, I feel like faith is maybe something that can't be falsified, or like it can be, but if logic fails you, faith is something that's internal, partially. I feel like no matter what, it's something that will always kind of stand by you on every basis of the word. You know what I mean?
It will, when it's rooted in a whole. This is why I think there's a bit of a struggle. When we pit things against each other, then we feel like it's need to choose, right? That's why I was being critical when Marie said, like, believing in faith, believing in science, right? I was like, why do I have to make a choice about that, right? In the sense that, like, as though one concludes the other and it doesn't, right? Is that actually the acceptance of faith, specifically of religious faith, is the question of meaning, of believing that there is a meaning, right? I didn't get into the nitty gritty of it, but actually, I'm not worried about science failing or not failing because science is a completely different kind of discipline, right? The claims of Christianity is that we have an immaterial God who created both the immaterial and the material. So the science is always as a single discipline. It's just one discipline among many, right? We hyper glorify science culturally today. We didn't always, but today we do, right? As being more than it is, but it's just a discipline. And it's going to go through trial and error just like everything else. They're going to get some things right, they're going to get some things wrong. There's nothing wrong with that, right? In the same way sociology will and psychology will, all disciplines will. But that I just need to understand that science is a manifestation of God, right? The only places where we can assess a claim is where there's an intersection of that claim and some other reality. That's the only place we can, right? Other than that, there's no way of approaching it, right? So for example, I mean, we can have our own talk about science and religion, but like, if I claim somebody's miraculously healed, but I can see on a biopsy that they're not healed, I can falsify the faith claim, right? But where they don't intersect, there's nothing to falsify the other. What I'm suggesting is that we have to stop viewing the world as oppositions and instead come to what is the essential claim of Christianity to work from, and to say that the essential claim of Christianity is starting in the real world. It starts in Christ before the Bible, because Christ would still be Christ even if no one wrote it down, right? Like, it doesn't matter that the Bible exists, that's secondary. It's the starting point of who is Christ, and if that claim is true, what follows from it. And if the things that follow from it contradict the real world, then there's something wrong with what I believe in, right? Like, if I'm making the claim of the earth is flat, and they're like, no, it's round. I'm like, no, you just wait, one day you're gonna find out it's gonna be flat, right? And it's like, it's round, right? Then there's a problem with my belief. But So I hear what you're saying. I would just modify it to say, see reason or faith as the overarching. There's a reason why God identifies as logos. Means logic, rationality, right? It's not an accident, right? And that all of these things that are things that come under it: science, geography, physiology, biology, sociology, psychology, high school, gender, women's studies. Then all of these things are disciplines that come under the overarching category of absolute truth, meaning.
I was going to say, just in response that because it makes sense that like we don't know anything. That's why they believe in faith. And faith is a bridge between the known and the unknown, in the sense that I begin to believe for a reason of something that I've experienced, I know, but also because of the fact that I can't be the one to see and know everything. So I need faith in order to bridge me to that point. Just like I wasn't one of the first apostles to have seen the resurrection. But what they say makes sense. Mm-hmm. And for me to actually get to where what they saw, I have to have that faith, that bridge, which allows me to get to that.
So faith, actually, this is a good thing to spin more off of. If anyone's bored, please leave. I'm so sorry, like I took so long. I can feel badly, like for real. But when you understand that faith is so simple, it's just trust. It's a choice to believe in something. The analogy that I think that might be helpful to people to understand is dating. Okay, in that before I choose to date someone, right? I mean, in our culture, we don't choose a random person, right? Like you don't just walk up and be like, "I want to date you," right? Like and blindfolded, right? Usually, you've observed the person in some way. There's been something that's given you enough trust to say, can we try this relationship out? And then within that relationship, you develop two things: knowledge of the person and experience with the person, right? And that as you increase in those, your trust increases too. That's why it's not bizarre. It's not a wrong thing that your faith increases. You're not a bad person if you don't have crazy levels of faith. But the more you know and the more you experience, then your trust grows. And that the relationship itself, that's faithfulness. It's remaining in the relationship, right? That I don't run away every time we have an argument. I don't run away when there's something I thought about you that turned out to not be true, right? Where it's like, oh man, I thought you loved sushi. And it's like, well, I don't. I do. But where it's just like, okay, I didn't know that about you. Okay, cool. I now know this about you. The problem with people in their spiritual lives and religious lives is they don't understand that that's what's happening, right? Is that you start off with this minor trust that's supposed to grow and grow and grow and grow when I remain faithful, that I can learn more and more and more, and that I'm not going to be upset when I find out something wasn't true that I thought, right? Where it's just like, oh, I was mistaken. This person doesn't like this, or this person actually loves this, and I didn't know that, right? And so faith is just that trust. Right? It starts with a decision, and the point that I was trying to make today is that the decision wasn't random. Right? The decision wasn't just because you felt a particular way in history. It wasn't because of that. It's because something behind it is real. And that's from that starting point of reality, then I can develop and grow.
And that analogy of dating, especially, is very apt because it's very much like faith. You date in order to build a conviction, a lifelong conviction on something that you're going to ground your life on, which is what marriage is. You're not dating just so, and in the same way, that's why we can have our feelings kind of waver to and fro when we're believing in something. There's a certain conviction in the right state of mind when I was really testing something that I really made a decision. I said, this is real. Even if some days I'm not going to really feel it, I know that I made this commitment because of a real experience that I actually sat through and listened. So, and I make that conviction, I make that commitment just like I would with marriage, or I don't make the commitment at all.
Exactly. That's why I really hope for all of you, like, when you have, like, whenever you have doubt, if you don't have doubt like you, for real, like, actually, like, lucky you, because it's hard. But whenever you do have those, is to come back and ask yourself, do I believe that there is sense in the world? Do I believe that there is a reason? Do I when we talk about saints and miracles and all these other things, I treat them secondarily, but that when you understand that faith is real, you'll understand that those things are real and that they're a natural product of it. They shouldn't be treated as something weird. Like so much will follow when there's this groundwork, right? And that's why, like, let's start off by recognizing that and the truth of it. That's why the proclamation of the church for centuries is Christ is right, always. Right? Actually, the church associates with this, and there's some practices we've lost because in Egypt, when the day off became Friday instead of Sunday, which was Friday liturgy, on Sunday, there's no bowing the knee. We're not supposed to ever kneel. That's one of the canons of Nicaea. We don't read the names of the dead in liturgy on Sunday ever out loud. It's not supposed to. And I'm saying now we do because when it ended up on Friday, people got used to it. And now they think that everyone is upset if he doesn't. Whereas we don't. And the reason being, we are only proclaiming the resurrection, right? The realness of the resurrection becomes like the starting point of every single thing that we do. Sick buzz. Sorry, I know it was a little bit long. My badness, guys. Question for you guys. The place that I live in, they just opened up the multi-purpose room yesterday. I also bought like a million exploding can boxes yesterday. I was gonna see if you guys are down for either next Sunday or Monday because it's Thanksgiving weekend. If you want to do like a potluck, I can see if I can rent the place and kick it and play games and just like chill. There's like a big screen TV. There's games. I have a Switch that I've never used. If you guys are down, how many people would be interested in something like that? Okay, sick. All right, then I'll look into it today and book it before the madness. Do you guys have any announcements? Okay. Let us, and everybody has to pray for the Raptors at 4 o'clock. I mean the Lakers. All right, that was a Freudian slip. All right, in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Lord, hear us and your prayer, intercessions, and prayers of Holy Mother Theotokos, Saint Mary, Saint George, Saint Anthony, Saint Nina, and Saint Pope Corliss, when we pray, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those trespassing against us. And lead us not into temptation, for thine is the kingdom, the power. Go in peace. The peace of the Lord be with you all. Mariam Gindi, I missed your question. I'll have to holler at you after. So